Hello, everyone. Welcome back to Honoring the Journey. I'm Leslie Neese, your host. And today I have a special treat for you. This guy, I've been kind of following him on social media for a while. I've seen him in person. We haven't really spoke a whole lot yet. But today, I think we're going to talk a lot because we're going to honor the journey of Brian Recker. You might recognize him if you're in the deconstruction community, or maybe he was your pastor at one time. Who knows?
God.
Brian, welcome to Honoring the Journey.
Are you guys listening? Oh my. It is always interesting when somebody who, because most of the people from the church where I was at, I don't speak with. There was a bit when I left. I left on pretty good terms. It wasn't a big divisive thing at all. It was very much just a goodbye and a nice farewell because I really didn't want to rock the boat. But about a year later, after I left the church, I did, I came out as affirming, basically, and started talking about that publicly. And at that point, they not only removed all my sermons from their website, but also kind of sent an email out to the congregation about Brian has sadly sort of departed from faithful doctrine and he's in prayer type of a thing. And so at that point, I really stopped hearing from folks. But every once in a while, I do get a DM from somebody who's like, hey, I briefly went to your church. And since then, I've kind of been on a journey and it's crazy seeing you in this place. And that's always really meaningful. And I wonder how many more people over the years will ultimately kind of change and see things differently and maybe circle back and be like, hey, I remember being upset about that, but actually you're a pretty chill guy, it turns out. So, if you're listening, that's awesome. And I'm glad you're here.
Well, I hope they're listening. I don't have a lot of evangelical listeners unless they're trying to figure out how to be mad at me again.
Right.
But I love when they do listen because that tells me that they're, listening. And unfortunately, we're not taught to do a lot of that in evangelicalism. It's more about, telling people what to believe.
And what you're even allowed to listen to. There's a lot of gatekeeping about what even information is okay to take in.
I'm sure I'm on that list.
Yeah, the blacklist. Yeah, I remember even in my seminary, I went to a pretty conservative seminary for my master's in ministry, and I did a paper. I don't remember what it was about, but I remember I quoted a relatively progressive theologian. I think maybe it was Moltmann. Anyways, it's a pretty big name theologian. But and I remember the guy did it in red. He underlined it and said, "This is a progressive" with an exclamation point. Almost like those are the off limits voices,
Can we talk about that word for a second? Progressive. Don't we want to progress as a society? I don't understand.
Into greater degrees of love, flourishing, wholeness, harmony, shalom.
And the woke thing is supposed to be some sort of a dig. And yet I love
a metaphor for salvation, basically, used multiple times in scriptures. The idea of waking up, of blind eyes seeing, being in the darkness and coming into the light. It's kind of a pretty cool picture of even being born again in many ways.
It feels like that to me. I actually talk about that in my book about how being, I guess it feels like a spiritual awakening, I guess, Brian, more than a deconstruction. But, the word deconstruction kind of pulls us all together. We're that's how we look for stuff. But it really is just an awakening, don't you think?
I totally. I like the deconstruction aspect because we are all coming from a vantage point and we all we bring our stories with us. And so for me, I find that I often am saying things very similar to what someone else is saying, even in maybe another spiritual tradition. But I'm saying it with the particular story and background of what formed me and what I've come out of and what brought me to this point. And that is a big part of who we are. So that deconstruction, you do carry that with you, I think.
Yeah.
And it forms even your language, your mental models for all of that. And so for good or ill, there's particular ways that we're broken because of what we came out of, maybe, or that we walk with a limp. In other words, spiritually speaking, our views of God were shaped in particular ways. Our ways of viewing ourselves and other people were shaped in very specific ways based on what we came out of that might be different. That, if you're kind of deconstructing a different kind of religious environment, you might have a different thing that you need to contend with. So
yeah.
That's why I do find that negative message is also important with the positive one, that you're speaking into kind of what you came out of and naming it for people, what happened to us,
Yeah. It's funny. I did it for a long time before I even knew what I was doing. I was like, oh, there's a word for this. And I can find other people doing it. It's pretty cool.
And it never stops. We're always, I think, reevaluating, being self-reflective. I got a muscle for it pretty early because I was not raised in evangelicalism. I was raised in fundamentalism. My dad is an independent fundamental Baptist pastor, an alumni of Bob Jones University. where he met my mom and where I went. I following my parents' footsteps. They were all my life. That was like the one thing I knew
When did
about
you go
growing up,
there?
was that I was going to go to Bob Jones University. I was there 04 to 08.
Oh my gosh. That's
Why? Have
great.
you been there?
I used to live there. I used to be on his radio.
In Greenville.
Yes, in Greenville. I did the
Wow.
morning show with Rob Dempsey and for I don't know, several
So
years.
did you know any Bob Jones people?
Oh yeah, yeah. And I knew a lot of people. Actually, we had a guy on who was on American Idol who went there who got in trouble for listening to Avalon or for him or something. Like
That
they got
story
mad at
sounds
him.
familiar. There were a lot of different
Do you know what
stories.
I mean? I can't but I just remember thinking, why? Like
Yeah.
even as an evangelical, Christian, now I was kind of brought up fundamental too, Brian. So I totally know where you're coming from with that. But I was more of an evangelical at that point, and I was like, this is
Oh
ridiculous.
yeah, we were the
They're
craziest.
so legalistic.
And from our perspective, like even other evangelicals were liberal. So at Bob
Right. Yeah.
Jones, like liberty, for example, which I mean, from now I look at that, that's conservative, it's Christian
Yes.
nationalism, it's
Mhm.
far right. At Bob Jones, we thought liberty were like the liberal compromisers. So
Oh,
that kind of maybe anchors you in what I grew up in. So my
whew.
first step of deconstruction was actually leaving fundamentalism and becoming a mainstream evangelical. That was after college. I was like, I'm not going back to that. That was so, I mean, the vibes were just off. You know
Oh,
what I'm saying?
terrible. Did you have to burn record albums and
No, because I never had them. I grew up in that.
oh,
I didn't ever even have that rebellious phase. The closest I got in high school, I listened to Johnny Cash, his American
wow.
recordings. I really got into that because it almost was like that was the most extreme thing I could imagine listening to, actually, because I was not allowed to listen to rock and roll really of any kind. Even like
James
Stephen
only.
Curtis Chapman was
Oh
seen as
yeah.
liberal, right? And yeah, we were King James only.
Yep.
My mom would only ever wear like skirts and dresses
Skirts
to
and dresses,
that sort of thing.
culottes.
Yeah, culotte culture.
Mhm.
At Bob Jones, the girls had to wear pantyhose every day. So yeah, I mean, basically though, what that gave me when I began to deconstruct that, it gave me a reflex, I think, for being able to, first of all, disappoint family. Like that was an initial, but I couldn't stay there. I knew I couldn't, but I could only go so far. Like becoming an evangelical felt like a rebellion at the time, believe it or not.
No, I do believe it. I know.
Because yeah, I mean, I even got some tattoos and would have an occasional beer, and that stuff felt very transgressive, but I found a Christian world where that stuff was okay, where I could be a little bit more normal, but I could hold on to all of those real core doctrinal fundamentals. Really, evangelicals are, in fact, doctrinal fundamentalists. My
Oh yeah.
doctrine hardly changed at all in that deconstruction.
Mhm.
That was like a cultural deconstruction in many ways.
Exactly. Oh, that's really observant, Brian. I love that. And you're right. It's so different. It's more about how you're living it out rather than what you believe, because the beliefs are
The
what save you.
differences are all it's actually funny enough, the fundamentalists, the difference between fundamentalists and evangelicals, not the fundamentals. It's really the extraneous stuff. It is stuff like
Mhm.
Bible translation and what we're wearing to church and stuff like that. The actual fundamentals they agree on, which means evangelicals are actually fundamentalists
Yeah.
in that, with better vibes. They got
Yeah.
graphic designers and that sort of thing.
And fog machines.
Yeah, it's fundamentalist for fog machines. And so it took me a while to see that, though. And it took an
I
extra
know.
level of bravery to deconstruct that, because that was like ripping the Band-Aid fully off in that way. And like, I had already disappointed. So it made it easier. Some evangelicals have a hard time because they're like, what are all these people going to think of me? But I had already kind of had that experience. So then it was really more an internal deconstruction. The second one wasn't as much disappointing my parents, because they already were like, you've got tattoos. Like, what's
I'm
wrong with
so
you?
disappointed. Yeah.
Yeah, I
Mhm.
mean, they were like, they weren't as disappointed then as they are now. Certainly. This is worse. Like, this is my
Sorry,
dad's
guys.
worst nightmare. You know what I'm saying? Sorry, Dad. I love you, but
Yeah.
I gotta be
You
me.
gotta be
But
you.
the so it wasn't their worst nightmare, but they were not a fan, right? My dad would be like, I think it's great that you're a pastor, but why do you have to have tattoos? He would give me that whole sort of thing.
Mhm.
So it wasn't about disappointing them. That second deconstruction was really about pulling out like some foundational stuff of my own, just understanding of God, myself, how I see the world. Like that was from before my memory begins. I was told that I was born with a wicked heart, deserving of hell, and that if I didn't accept Christ as my savior, I would die and go to hell. But
Mhm.
that through Christ, I could be saved and go to heaven. That was like, I mean, I can't tell you the first time I heard that, because it's like from before I
It's
remember anything.
indoctrinated so young. Yeah.
So, and we'll talk about that maybe more next time I'm on, if we're going to go deep into like what the book is about. But all that to say, that deconstruction was really like, there's some grieving of like, oh, like I was, a bad thing happened to me. I was indoctrinated, and recognizing what it did to me and how it caused me to even view other people, like for instance, queer people.
Mhm.
But it was also really exciting. I mean, I think deconstruction was such an exciting time to recognize that I had permission to listen to parts of myself that I didn't think that I was allowed to listen to.
Mhm.
And also like to get to know myself, and even I would say fall in love with myself in the sense, and be proud of myself in new ways, to even see like that some of those things that I used to be disappointed in about me, like for instance, I was never good at soul winning. And
Neither was I.
I always thought that that was a deficiency in my spirituality. Like if I was a better Christian, like maybe my dad, I'd be more passionate in evangelizing people. But now I can see that that was a good impulse, that I could see how there was like an alienating element, that coercive element in that. And that I was always resistant to that because it never felt like love to me. And now I find that wasn't something that I need to be disappointed in, or, oh, that wasn't a deficiency in me, that I can fully listen to that part of myself that actually is attentive to what's causing alienation and disconnection versus what's drawing me closer to people and seeing our oneness.
That is, oh my goodness, you just nailed something that was, I think, the most impact for me is being able to connect with other human beings on a level that is just so deep as compared to before, because they were a project to be fixed for a very long time in my life. Like I had the answer, and they were just so lucky that God brought me into their life because now I could teach them the truth. And now I'm just like, hey, I'm lucky you're in my life because you're going to teach me what you know and why you believe what you believe. And I'm not afraid of it anymore. Like
Mm,
it's just, huh. I mean,
mm.
the colors that I see now, like we were living in black and white, Brian. You know what I mean?
I do know what you mean.
And it's
Yeah,
the color.
what you're describing is mutuality, and that's just not something that's possible in a binary universe, in a fixed sort of religious system where, yeah, you have the right religion and everybody else has the wrong religion, and also your one leads to heaven and everyone else's leads to hell. That does not leave room for the kind of
No,
relationships you just described.
it really doesn't. And it's funny because I think moving to Utah and being among, like, I went from the Bible Belt to living in Utah, which so I'm now a minority, because it's all Mormon. And I realized very quickly that all religions think they're the one true religion. So I'm like, wait, we're not the only real true religion. Are you joking right now? Like, there's no way. I know I'm right because I'm based on truth. But like everybody else feels the same way. I think that was one of the biggest wake up calls for me.
Yeah. Um, I that's interesting. I similarly, I didn't have that moment. I think that could be really helpful being in the minority like that.
Hmm.
Um, it was for me just relationships, I think, as well. Like when I stepped away. So first of all, I was getting out from under that institutional pressure.
Yeah.
I was having a lot of questions. It's not like I wasn't deconstructing while I was a pastor, but there were limits to my deconstruction while I was still within that structure, especially being paid in that structure. And not just the financial incentives that my salary relied upon it, but really my whole network of relationships relied upon it. And
Your
just
identity.
what I represented, my identity,
Yeah.
absolutely, every aspect of it. And so while I was wrestling pretty deeply, especially with Christian nationalism and evangelical complicity in that, and white supremacy and evangelical complicity in that, having read books like Jamar Tisby's Color of Compromise and Jesus and John Wayne by Kristen Dumais, I was very troubled by so much in evangelical DNA. But that is even different from, I think, questioning some of those exclusionary doctrines. I think one of the last pillars to fall in a lot of people's deconstruction is that idea of exclusivity. And even, I always just want to jump into stuff in my book because so one of the reason I wrote about hell, in deconstruction, I find that really is the root thing for why most people, baked into our idea of what it is to be a Christian, is that you've got to be a Christian or you're kind of fucked.
Yeah. You're
Like,
going to go to hell. Yeah.
and it's not like there has to be some incentive to be a Christian. Like there has to be, like, you've got to be wrong to not be a Christian. And a lot of times when you question that premise, like I still consider myself a Christian, but my
Hmm.
girlfriend is not a Christian. And I don't think that she's a worse person for that. in many ways, she's better than most Christians that I know. She's a wonderful person. I don't think that becoming a Christian would necessarily automatically make her a better person. That's a different kind of Christianity. I think people are not really familiar with that. That what they're used to, I think, is the kind of Christianity where, well, you got to be a Christian because that's the right thing that you're supposed to be, as opposed to seeing it as a spiritual path of love and transformation that I'm following as I follow Jesus.
So what would you say, if I presented the word Christian to you, how would you describe it now as compared to before? So before, what would you say, and what would you say now?
So I think what people are often, I think, meaning when they're asking that is that a lot of times they want to like, what are the bare minimum like doctrines that you have to believe to be a Christian? They're like, what should you believe type of thing? And I think my old answer would have been like the Nicene Creed is kind of like the bare minimum type of thing. That seems to be like the bar of entry.
The bar of entry.
I don't think that way anymore. And even that is a pretty ecumenical, open-minded way to think. I would say some Christians are a lot stricter than that. The Nicene Creed would be like the ecumenical option. But for me, I think it depends on what kind of Christianity we're talking about. I think a lot of people, when they're like, is this a real Christian? They're saying like, are they a real like Jesus follower? And so for me, I think, we could talk about fruit. We can talk about, does this reflect the ministry of Jesus, the spirit of Jesus, the way of Jesus? Is this a person who's earnestly trying to follow Jesus? That would be how I'm defining it for me. Yeah. So I'm still a Christian because I'm somebody who's earnestly trying to follow Jesus.
Same.
That's different though than like looking at Christian history, because I think what sometimes happens that I don't like is, I'll point at something an evangelical does that feels, like, immigration, for example, like, man, people who say that like, they care more about the borders of our country than showing compassion to the marginalized. That's crazy. And I point out how that's not in line with Jesus. And some people will chime in and say, these people aren't even Christians. And I don't do that. I don't find that helpful at all for a lot of reasons. One, I don't think that's my job to determine, but two, like, actually that is Christianity. For most of Christian history, Christianity has been a tool of empire, and it has been used in many different ways to hurt vulnerable people. And that's a part of the legacy of Christianity too. So I'm not going to say the no true Scotsman fallacy, where only the good ones who did good things are Christians, and then everybody else, well, that doesn't really count. That's not Christianity, because that is about like defending Christianity itself, or the legacy of Christianity, which is something I don't really care about at all. Yeah. And so if we're talking about like what counts as Christian, it's like, man, actually, like, I think it all kind of counts historically, but I think we can call balls and strikes about like, yeah, that's not my Jesus at work. There's just incredible common grace. And when you kind of move away from that need for exclusivity, that need to be the right one, then you can have eyes to see it a bit more. I think believing that like, well, Christianity is the way, then you have to justify Christianity and say, well, it must have done more harm or more good than harm in the world. It must be because it's the right way. And so you have to like do apologetics for all of Christianity. And I don't know, I want to have more. I said this recently. Somebody was asking me about what I thought about Christian unity. And while I think that Christian unity is important, I think more about human solidarity than Christian unity.
Human unity is better.
And I don't think Jesus was, when he was talking about unity in like John 17, that they may be one as I and the Father are one, you and me and I and them. I don't think Jesus was just talking about, I hope that this new religious sect like sticks together. I do think that Jesus had something more universal in mind, something like what Martin Luther King talked about when he talked about the world house, of like, we have to all learn how to be good neighbors and see each other as one human family.
And it's hard because in the sect that I was in of Christianity, and especially fundamentalism, there's so much rapture theology and end of the world. And one of the big things they push is, at the end of the world, everybody's going to talk about unity, but it's not going to be the right one. So then they're afraid of unity.
The one world thing. I forgot about that. That is such a big thing. Yeah. My dad was
so annoying. I'm like, oh, so it's evil to be unified with other people.
That is, like, talk about one of the worst lies of Satan there.
I know.
Right.
So sad.
That is really bizarre. I forget what scripture they get that from, because wasn't Jesus.
No, of course not. So, okay, Brian, let's talk about your deconstruction a little bit. When you were pastoring as an evangelical, sort of feeling a little rebellious because you're no longer, quote, fundamentalist, what was the first thing that made you say, oh gosh, I don't know if I believe this anymore, or I think I might believe it a little different?
2015. I remember like the first, well, maybe it wasn't the first, maybe there had been moments before, but the first like breaking point that felt like a game changer, like, oh, like this, it felt really significant. That kind of really did set me down that course was when Donald Trump announced his candidacy in 2015. I remember that first Sunday after he did so, I mentioned it in my sermon as like I made a joke about it because I just thought we were all on the same page. Like, this is clearly a buffoon. I thought he was going to be one of those guys that was like a flash in the pan and then like went away. Like that would happen back in the day, you know? Anyway, and then a few weeks pass and he doesn't go away. And then all of a sudden he's the front runner. And then I realized that like people in my church are excited about it. And then I realized my parents are huge Trump fans. And like slowly, it just seemed like most of American Christianity is like getting fully behind this guy. And while that was incredibly disorienting, I also am quite thankful for that because it caused me to see things that I was just pulling the wool over my eyes on. It caused me to really reckon with what I was a part of and how I was formed to be quite thoughtless about politics. Up until that point, I was basically a conservative by default because that's what I was always told I was supposed to be. Yeah. And I hadn't really put that much work into reconsidering my political views.
Why would you? If you're a Christian, you're a Republican, period. End of story.
Yeah. I mean, I'm a little embarrassed about that. I was, what was
Same.
I in 2015? How many years? That's 10 years ago. I was in my mid 20s and, you know, but it was helpful to me. It really woke me up. And yeah, I'll give myself some grace. I had a bad starting point. Like I was very far to the right. I grew up listening to Rush Limbaugh every single day for social studies as a homeschooler. So that was my starting point. So it just took me a little while. But
wow, that was, so you're telling me there's hope for everyone.
And what's interesting, though, it was the morals that I was taught as a Christian in both fundamentalism and evangelicalism that caused me to look at Trump and say, absolutely not. I could never. And it went against what I was taught in the church, you know? So it's like they gave me the tools to recognize him for what he was. And it made me very disillusioned and discouraged that so many of my elders didn't see that. And the big question for me at the time was like, wow, what else are they lying to me about? You know, because
I was getting ready to say that is exactly what I thought. I'm like, if they're convinced that this is true, and I'm pretty sure it's not. Like, oh gosh, what else are they teaching me?
It was like I'd never been more sure of anything in my life. Yeah. It was like you had it was cartoonishly on the nose. I just felt like, oh, if you don't have the moral discernment to see through this, then you have no discernment at all. Like not in any way that matters. Like he's the bad guy. If you're aligning with him, then you're choosing to be the bad guy. And then wait, have we always been the bad guys? It really was like a bunch of things like dropped. And I saw kind of which side I was on in terms of, am I with the domination system in history or am I on the side of the people that Jesus sided with?
Yeah. Wow.
And so for a few years there, I was doing some work. I mean, it didn't take me long. Another deconstruction that I had at that time was political. And so kind of deconstructing my conservative political viewpoints and going a bit deeper there and doing some reading politically. I came out of the other side of that, a socialist within a few years. And so there were a lot of deconstructions happening, and I'm meanwhile pastoring and trying to kind of push back on what I see happening, especially because knowing that like people in my church are listening to Fox News like every night of the week, I have this opportunity where I have their attention and I can talk to them about loving their neighbor and trying to talk about the kingdom of God in ways that pull them back, hopefully, into more loving ways of thinking. And for some years, I actually found a lot of purpose in that. So I won't say that I regret doing that, but I will say that while I stayed within that structure, I could only do so much, and I was censoring myself, and I was also preventing myself from going as far as maybe I would have gone, because I knew that, but if I cross these lines, then actually I'm out. I can't quit. Namely, the main one being LGBT affirming, because you could kind of push on the edges of a lot of things, but they really draw the line in the sand on queer people. Like once you love queer people, which is weird because this is not a core Bible doctrine. This is not one of the fundamentals. This has nothing to do with inerrancy. Like it is weird, but that really is the one where if you do that, you've
definitely, you're following Satan and sliding down the slippery slope. Yeah. It's incredible. I remember realizing that I was feeling affirming, but afraid to say anything because I knew if I did that the same hate that they had thrown on them would come on me. And I wanted to protect myself. And then, so it's just not worth it. It's not worth it because then you can't protect other people when you're protecting yourself. And like, how can you be an ally if you're not in it with them? You know what I mean? So,
Yeah, I give myself some grace, but looking back, it's embarrassing how much I changed once I stepped out. That was really the main one. I mean, I had already shifted on a lot of different issues. I was like super pro-immigrant. I was fighting to be anti-racist. I was like deconstructing certain structures, but I was trying to be compassionate towards queer people without, like, I didn't feel like I had permission within my own spirit to get, like, I felt like I would be going against something, right? I couldn't fully listen to my conscience, but all along it was like, it always felt unloving.
same.
It
Yeah.
always felt unloving. And I remember even this struggle with even my own children. And I'm so glad that I became affirming while my children were still very young. They've only ever known me as affirming, really, like in their memory when we've talked about it. They've never heard me say anything but, love and acceptance towards queer people. But I remember when my first son was first born and I was still a pastor, evangelical church, and I had the thought, I hope he's not gay. And in that thought, as I sat with it, like, I knew that I wouldn't love him any less. I knew that I would still accept him. I knew that I couldn't see that as evil or reject him. But I also knew that went against everything I knew, everything that I believed in evangelicalism, and that it would mean really a crisis with the church. And I almost just didn't want to deal with that. So I was almost like, oh, I hope they're not gay so that we don't have to go through the pain and rejection that he and because I knew I wouldn't be able to reject my son. Like I knew
Mm-mm.
that.
And you
And so
shouldn't.
and so
Yeah.
it's almost like I just hope we don't have to deal with that, which
Mhm.
is like that's like a shitty way to feel. I think I think that will be resonant though with people who were in the church who maybe understood that tension a little bit. But like that should have told me right then and there, like, well, that can't be from God then. That can't be love.
Mm. It takes a while though. I mean, the indoctrination runs deeper than I think we even realize. And you start to see that because the fears that hold you back. I think, one of the first things I did was make a list of all the things I was afraid of. And that was my deconstruction to-do list. Go through each of these things that you're afraid of and deconstruct them one at a time. And that was how I started my deconstruction. And I did it very quietly and stepped away from the church to protect them from me because I felt like maybe I was being led down a wrong road and I didn't want to be a bad influence. I mean, it was such a mind, what? I mean,
Mm,
like I was so afraid that I was wrong, but I felt like I had to pursue it because it felt so much more like love than
yeah.
what I was doing. I don't know.
That's what we should follow. At the end of the day, this is one of the nice things about not believing in hell. I don't
Mhm.
believe we're going to be audited for
Right.
whether all of our beliefs were right or not. Like, did you
Yeah.
to pass the metaphysical questions about God test? Like, and if we got all the answers right or wrong about God, I I think that we should try to be loving more than right.
Yeah.
The
Yeah.
point is right relationships, not
Mhm.
religious perfection, performance, doctrine, even. Um,
So freeing.
I
So
will just
freeing.
circle around since I mentioned that about my son. I will say that the end of that story is that back a few years ago when we first kind of had a conversation, because we have some close friends who are married gay men, and we hang out with them from time to time. Actually, at this point, my sons have been around quite a few of my adult queer friends, and so we had a first conversation about that back, maybe less than a year after my deconstruction, and I was able to like just explain to him, whoever you love, because at that time he was exploring. He was like, I think I might have crushes on boys and girls, but he just didn't know what a crush meant at the time.
Yeah.
Well, he might still. At this point, though,
Who
it seems
knows?
like I don't know. He's kind of girl crazy right now, actually. So I think he's kind of, but it's none of that matters. The point is, I was able to say, he was asking me, what does it mean to be gay? He was asking me that. And so I was just able to explain it and to say, and whether you love boys or love girls, whoever you love is going to be beautiful because all love is beautiful. And I like told him that. And I just like wept after
I was
because
gonna
I was so
say, yeah.
thankful that I was able to say, like, I couldn't, even if I felt like I wanted that to be true a few years previous, I wanted it to be true, but I didn't know that I was allowed to say that. I
Mhm.
hadn't given myself permission yet to really fully believe that. But when I said it, I didn't feel like I was lying. I don't feel like I'm lying now. I know that that's true with every fiber of my being. And I've seen the fruit of that belief. So both in my, in the beloved queer people that I know and in my own life, I'm a better person and a better Christian for believing that about them.
Well, and you can love somebody on such a deeper level and connect with them on such a deeper level when you're not, you know, separating them like from you, like, oh, you're different, or oh, you're this, or like we're all the same. Like, take
Totally.
away these flesh suits, we're the same. You
Yeah.
know what I mean? Like, we look the same. Doesn't matter what color our skin is, doesn't matter who we love. None of that matters. We're all the same. You're just not taught that when you're indoctrinated into a we're right and they're wrong. They're the enemy, they're deceived. We know it all. We know the truth. They're stupid.
Yeah.
And I mean, and I don't know that that word stupid was ever used, but it kind of,
For
that was what it was implied,
sure.
that
No,
they're
well, they
so
had to
lucky
be,
that you're in
and
your,
worse
or
than that.
blessed.
They were damned. It's
Yeah.
worse than stupid.
Yes.
What they were believing was so detestable that they deserve to be tortured for eternity over it.
And like, how can you relax and enjoy heaven for all of eternity, knowing that there are people whose flesh is being melted off of their body for all of eternity with no chance of reprieve? Like, how, like, who,
Yeah,
I don't
like
know.
what if that was your kid, right?
Right. Or your best
Kind
friend,
of
or
heaven
your
is that.
spouse, or it could have been anybody. And I'm realizing, Brian, tell me what you think of this, because this is an observation I've made. I feel like most people who deconstruct, who really go for it and like start really asking the questions, are super empathetic, highly sensitive people. They're people who, a lot of them are very artistic, are very creative. Um, and I feel like many of the people that I've had, I mean, it's, of course I do have intellectuals and all of that, but I think at the core of who they are, there's such a deep empathy and a loveliness, and it never felt
Yeah,
right to
for
discourage
sure.
other people from being in your life because of what they believe.
Well, I think that's true. I also think that's one reason we're probably seeing the numbers be a bit stronger with women deconstructing and leaving the church than
Oh
men,
yeah.
because women do rate higher on empathy as well. So that would make sense.
Hmm.
Yeah, I do think that those things are at odds with each other. Empathy versus that, yeah, superiority, that need to, and I don't put that all in arrogance. I think it's people are
No.
looking for safety,
Hmm.
they're looking for the security of that. Like I the way that I know that I'm safe is that, like, you have to be, in order for me to be safe, you have to be out or damned in some way. So there has to be some sort of binary so that I can be on the right side of it so that I can feel safe. But what if there wasn't a side, What if you
Yeah.
stopped
What if
doing
we're all safe? What if
that?
we're all loved right where we
Yeah.
are? What if
And
we
I've
don't
come to
have to
see, like,
do?
when you are putting people on the other side of that, especially like I was talking about, like, what if those are your kids? I'm
Mhm.
like, that kind of heaven where my kids are in hell, like that's hell, right?
Mhm. That
And then I
is.
think, well, that's where my dad is right now.
Mhm.
And I do think that there's, yeah, it's a kind of hell for sure. To have to
Yeah.
believe that about people, to feel like that's what God demands that you believe
Mhm.
about people. And to have to believe that that's who God is. I mean, every level of it really, it's very alienating. And I try
Difficult.
to, I mean, it does give me compassion for people that hold those fear-based beliefs,
Yes.
because
Yes.
typically they're having to hold that against people that they love. And that's causing it to be really, really difficult to even love even their dearest loved ones. And so on the days where, my dad hurts my feelings because he calls me a heretic or something like that, I try to remember, like, his version of love is quite skewed by the fact that he unfortunately, has that great fear about my eternal future.
Mhm. Can you imagine living like I mean, I tell people all the time, I lived in hell when I believed in it. Because
Yeah.
when you believe in hell and you believe that that's an option, how do you ever have a good day? You like, and I tell people that, I'm even people who are still in it, I'm like, I had so much fear, and they're like, I don't have any fear. I'm like, really? How do you not have fear? Do you
Numb
believe in an
yourself.
eternal conscious torment? Because if you
Yeah, that
do,
is
I
incredible.
promise you are afraid. Like, don't
Yeah.
lie to yourself.
I It is interesting, like, I do wonder about the psychology of some of these folks, especially, like,
Mhm.
sometimes in a reel, I'll talk about how I don't believe hell is real, and that to me seems like a very liberating thought, and some people come on, obviously, to argue with me, and when they do, it's not even just like, "Well, here's the Bible verses." Some people will say, like, "You are, um, what you're doing is awful. It's detestable. It's like frightening. And the good news is you're wrong. And I'm like, how is that? Like, I just have a hard time, even in the moral imagination. Like, it's even when I believed in hell, I didn't want it to be true. I was hoping I was wrong about that. I just didn't think I could question it. So like, I do struggle with somebody's mind when they're like, I know I'm right and I'm glad I'm right. Like, I sure hope there's a hell. I hope I'm not wrong about that. I don't understand. I don't know what's going on there.
I think it's a justice thing. They feel like, people need to be punished, but it's like, then that would be
Ooh,
you. But if
right.
you believe in Jesus and say a prayer, then you're set. It's like you can
Right.
keep
Because their
doing
thing doesn't
these
even have
things.
any, right. They believe that, right. They'll say sometimes, well, don't you need justice for like Hitler? But they believe that if Hitler prayed a prayer right before he died, like he's
Yeah.
actually fine.
Yeah.
So no, their method doesn't really check out even on a justice perspective.
Yeah. Oh, we're going to talk more, guys. Just so you know, I've already asked Brian to come back because he just wrote a book. It won't be out until September, but it's all about hell. And I said, will you please come back and let's just do a whole episode on hell? So he has agreed. So you will hear that this fall. But so let's okay. Sorry, I know we're probably going to repeat ourselves a little bit in that episode, but
Oh no, there's
let's go
plenty to
back
talk about.
to let's go back to deconstruction. Aside from hell and the LGBTQ, all of that, like, what were some things? Because, like, I do get a lot of people, Brian, who listen to this show who are deconstructing. They are doing it very quietly. I call them invisibles. They
Hmm.
are on the internet looking for answers and looking for somebody's voice that is like, oh, yes, I see. Oh my gosh, there's somebody else who feels that way. Let's talk
Mm-hmm.
to these invisibles for a minute. They're not, they can't even, like, they can't even like my posts because their friends
Right.
will see. They can't, the only thing I hear is from them on DMs, and it's like, please don't tell anybody, and I get it. Been there, done that, been an invisible, but now
Yeah.
I'm fully visible. What would you say are some of the other things that really you had to wrestle with through your deconstruction?
I mean, what just came to mind as you were saying that was how so much of that is tied to our sense of belonging. And so I think the reason they're invisible, right? I think you should interrogate that. Like, if you're in that space, why are you a part of a community that's forcing you to be invisible? Why are you a part of a community where you can't actually, like, I'm not saying even deconstruct, but just to be honest about where you actually are, even to say, like, I don't know where I'm going to land. I'm wrestling with some of these big things. And I like the way that some of these people are, like, I guess well, I know why, because I was in that. And the
Me
reason
too.
was belonging, and that
Mhm.
your belonging is at stake. That those people would back off from you at some level. And I guess that to me is just a very revealing thing. And I guess I have, I feel like I have friends now that, because I don't think I'm going to stop changing. I don't think I've like
Mhm.
landed at like the perfected form
There
of
is
Brian
no landing
in his
now.
final form, right?
Yeah,
No, like,
it's
I,
fantastic. It's
when,
an adventure.
right. When people sometimes are like, well, how did you land where you're at now on the other side of deconstruction? I'm like, brother, I haven't landed anywhere. What are you talking about? Like, I'm never going to feel the need to land anywhere ever again. I'm going
Mm-mm.
to keep evolving. Um, I'm going to follow
Uncertainty,
love.
guys. Yes,
And,
uncertainty. Ugh, it's
but
beautiful.
what I want as I change,
Mm.
I guess I would want the kind of friends who are like, oh, you've changed, and not be like, so I guess I'm going to have to cut you off, but actually be like, well, tell me more. Like, tell me about this change that you're making. Tell me more about who you're becoming, leaning in with curiosity in that way. Um, and so I think it is hard when you feel like you're not a part of that, and you look around and you know that you're going to lose a lot. And so for me, I think I got that muscle a little bit early on for disappointing people.
Mhm.
I have tried to communicate, so for example, before I even posted my first post about being affirming, I actually reached out to the pastors at my old church and let them know that I was about to post that, because I didn't want them to be blindsided, because I knew that it would cause a bit of a drama firestorm there of like, former pastor posted, like, right. So I actually said, hey, just so you know, I've changed on some things. I still love you guys. It's not personal. I'm on my own journey. I appreciate our time together. And I just wanted to give you a heads up before you saw it on the internet that I am going to be processing some of these more progressive beliefs. And I guess I've just always tried to have this posture of like, I'm on my journey, and that, like, my hand of relationship is still extended to you. I'm not cutting off relationship with you.
Same.
And
Yeah.
also, I'm not even like condemning you. I might think some of your beliefs are wrong, but I don't think that you're bad as a person. I actually think we're all unshakably good. And so that's
Yeah.
the good news. One of the differences between us, like, I might think you're wrong, but I don't think you're going to hell. You know?
Yeah.
Um, no, I've just tried to keep that line of connection open. And I think in some cases, some people have been deeply hurt by the church. I understand they maybe need to take more distance from those relationships because of spiritual trauma. I totally get that. I'm not saying everybody needs to, but I think communicating that, and then it really is on them whether they are going to say, well, I can't possibly maintain this. And I don't know, is a relationship that, when you communicate clearly that you love them and want to stay in their life, but you are changing and you're going to be a more honest version of yourself, and they cut off relationship with you, is that the kind of relationship that you should be fighting to keep in your life at the expense of who you're becoming and at the expense of your own soul, when they're not even willing to like be open to that continued relationship? So I think there's like a step of courage though, but it is scary because we are wired to want to
To
stay
belong.
anchored in that belonging.
We
Yeah.
want to belong. Well, and I got to say, as a cis white man, who was a pastor, for you to deconstruct and to come away and to follow your heart that you've been told your whole life is wicked and evil. But like, wow, that takes a lot of courage, a lot of guts. And so what is like, is there anything that you're experiencing now that I don't know, that is breaking your heart right now as a result of your deconstruction, or is it all good? I mean, it's because like I think people think that we are under the illusion that nothing breaks our hearts anymore and that we're just we're too far gone, but I experience it every day. So I'm just curious, what's breaking your heart right now?
Hmm. Yeah, I mean, I did lose a lot for sure. My whole life changed, and I have discovered a lot of joy on the other side. I found that as I've become more authentic, you find your people. So even if you lose some people, you're going to find people that are more aligned with you.
Yeah.
And so that's been really joyful. And I feel like I can be more myself in that space. So I feel more like I've found myself than I've lost myself, certainly. But I have lost really the perceived vision of what I thought my life would be, to include my career. I thought I would always be a pastor. Now I don't know what I'm doing. There's a lot of uncertainty that I really struggle to live with, the kind of uncertainty that my personality, I really do crave more structure and stability and certainty, and I don't have any of that. So that's all been quite scary, but I think in many ways I have like adjusted to that a little bit. It's been a few years in where I realize now that that kind of security that I was demanding was, I think, robbing me of the kind of vulnerability that I think is more authentic. If you have community, I realize that, like, if I have real relationships, that's where I should find my security, because ultimately, like, we hold each other. Nothing is really, like, we try to build like systems to keep ourselves protected, and we end up often alienating people,
Wow.
as opposed to like just trusting like that that God has us through one another and we can hold each other. So what's breaking my heart? I don't know. I think I do get sad about the fact that I think there was a moment where I was like, oh, deconstruction is like this wave, because I was writing it and I was like, so many people are going to deconstruct. And I do think a lot of people are going to deconstruct. And
Yeah.
I just saw like a vision for many evangelicals, really evangelicalism in America kind of changing and fading and becoming more progressive. That was a pipe dream. I don't know. I only thought that for like 5 minutes. I think then I realized, oh yeah, that's probably not going to happen. They're going to
Yeah.
double down and they're going to be who they are. And that's going to be a power structure that will be probably the face of Christianity. Like, and so that does break my heart as well, that like Jesus is so poorly represented in our country, like all-time highs of bad representation for JC. I mean, Trump
Yeah.
is like the face of Jesus Christ in terms of his followers, in our country. And that's really sad. But that does keep me Christian too. It keeps me motivated. It gives me something to do
Yeah.
because it's one of the reasons that I still want to stubbornly hold on to that identification, despite, I think, all the bad that's often been done in the name of Christianity, is that Jesus is too good to be known by, I think, followers who do such a poor job of representing who Jesus
Yeah.
was. So that breaks my heart. And the fact that it doesn't seem like our country is I think there was a lot of hope even before the last election. I thought maybe, and with Trump winning again, it does feel like, oh, maybe my hope shouldn't be in our country getting better, because that might not happen. And so that's like a bad place for my hope. And so it is like it's like you're working without any particular thought of victory, whatever that would look like, just because it's the right thing to keep showing love, to keep showing up. And so I don't know if that answers your question.
No, it totally does. No, and I think those are both very poignant things that break, I think, everybody's heart who's going through deconstruction. It's like, oh, this isn't fixing it either.
Yeah.
But the difference, I think, from what I was before and who I am now, is that now I just really, really feel like I'm making true connections with people. I'm able to fully be myself 100%. And I'm letting go of certainty, which I didn't realize how crippling that was. When you're certain, you get desperate because you have to defend it. And that's why they teach you, apologetics and defense of the faith. And here's what you do. And here's the Bible verse that you do it with, because so there's this anxiety that comes with, oh my gosh, somebody's going to try to, take my faith away or prove it wrong. And I have to be ready with an answer, So I think now just not having that.
So fragile.
Oh, it's terrible.
Yeah.
It's terrible. And like for anybody who's still in it and they're saying that it's not like that, I just, please step away and look at it from it is like that.
Well, and it causes you to distort the truth even about like, in the name of biblicism and biblical inerrancy, you're actually not even honest about what the Bible is or what it's doing. You have to actually reject the majority of Bible scholarship.
And that's hard. That
and
was the hardest part
of
for
loving
me.
the Bible.
Yeah.
Which
How do you see the Bible now, Brian?
How do I see the Bible? I mean, it's there. I see it. Where is it?
It's
over there. I have one somewhere. I've got a few.
NLT. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I don't see it as inerrant. I do see it. I mean, the word inspired still works for me. It's a pretty flexible, malleable word in a lot of ways. Yeah. I don't see it as the only inspired thing in the world. I don't think it's the only way that God speaks to us, but I do believe God speaks through the Bible. I believe Jesus is the word of God, not the Bible, but I do believe that we can encounter God's word in the Bible. I think it's a sacred journey. Everybody's spiritual journey is a sacred journey. And we get like, amazingly well preserved and with a lot of integrity, with some really powerful narrative arcs. We get this incredible journey of a people with God and their evolving consciousness and faith and sense of belonging and chosenness by God. So yeah, I love the Bible. I love studying the Bible. It's why, as someone who, even has deconstructed, I still would anchor myself in the Christian tradition, not out of a sense of superiority or exclusivism, but because I think that there is a beautiful spirituality to be found within our sacred text and within Jesus Christ himself. So, and you find that in the Bible. But I think that people just read it in a really unhelpful way often. And I get DMs all the time from people who are really confused because when one little hole is poked, they think they have to throw everything away. And that is such
that's what you're told. Framework. If it's not all true, none of it's true. You were told that.
And then they want to know, once they're like, okay, fine. Well, maybe some of it can be untrue and some of it's true. But then which parts? Tell me which parts. Tell me exactly which parts are true and which parts. Because that's what they're like, well, how do you know which parts? How do you know what to believe and what not to believe? It's either all true, because once you take away the certainty of it's all true, then it's like you have some uncertainty. Well, people are going to agree and disagree about which parts we should. And it's like, would you just relax? Like you don't even need to know, really. Like there's, what, welcome to the journey, man. Like, like, hey, this is going to be a long road. I'm so happy. This is what I would say. Oh, I'm so happy you're interested in that. Why don't you spend a lifetime studying the various viewpoints on that? Because there's been a lot written about it that you haven't even been privy to, because you've been in this intellectual cul-de-sac of evangelicalism where you can only believe the one thing. Like, welcome to the conversation we've all been having, not we. I'm new to it still in some ways.
But you're in it now.
Bright new world of, Yeah, you're right. There aren't guardrails. You're right. People are going to agree and disagree about particular ways to approach even things that you maybe considered a core doctrine, like the Trinity or the divinity of Christ, or whether the resurrection is historical. Like, actually, people who consider themselves Christian don't even always agree on how to talk about those things.
Or how to interpret the Bible. That's the problem isn't the Bible, it's
Totally.
the different interpretations.
One of my favorite definitions of Christianity, is it Eugene Roberts? Is that this guy? Oh, I have a book. It doesn't matter. I think the scholar is Eugene Roberts. He says Christianity is a language in which to disagree. That's how he. So it's like it's a way of talking about spirituality, but it's not a particular set of beliefs. Like, this is welcome to this path, and it will involve, wrestling with, well, how do you deal with the Canaanite genocide? Well, I like the way Pete Enns talks about it, but maybe somebody else is going to have a better take. Like, that's okay. Like, we don't have to have. I think that's one thing in deconstruction. Like, when you first start, you're like, okay, I want to get as quickly as possible to my new set of beliefs.
Yes.
And it's like, you don't need to do that. And part of the reason is we want that certainty because of punishment looming, where you think, I need to get the right answers, because like the consequences for the wrong answers is pretty steep, And so when you take that away, it invites curiosity when you realize it's not about punishment. Because the best way to love, that is a tricky question. Okay. I do think we'll have legitimate disagreements about, well, what does love look like in this situation? There is something a bit subjective about that, but that's what guides me now, is this reflecting love? And maybe there will be some disagreement on what that always looks like, but at least we've got like the right parameters, and we're not using arbitrary religious rules to guide us, as opposed to putting people first,
Yeah, that's beautiful. Well, thank you so much. I know you have to go. He's on dad duty today. He's got to go get his kids here soon. But Brian, I have absolutely loved hearing your perspective and your journey. I love the path we just went down. I've picked some wildflowers and I'm going to get back on my path. I just thank you for sharing your heart and your journey with us. I honor your journey.
Thanks, Leslie. This has been fun.
And I can't wait to have you back, because
let's do it.
Yes, we'll do it. And we're going to get theological, guys. It'll be so much fun.
I'll get you a copy of the book first.
Oh, yes. Then we can read it and talk about it. That'd be awesome. Well, thank you so much, and have a great day, Brian. Thanks for being here.